Path of the Pole by Charles Hapgood, Part 7. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you not live and slightly hungover here at the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Cube of Science, where we are nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. So we played a Dynasty show last night, $50 Dynasty acoustic, sort of. I was the only acoustic part.
Hey, I played the acoustic. It was plugged in.
Everyone else was plugged in.
Your vocals were plugged in. Your drum was mic'd.
Yeah.
Don't be nitpicking here.
Yeah. Well, acoustic usually doesn't mean full pedals, electric guitars,
Well,
amplifiers with everything turned up to 10 or 11.
It's a
But it was a great show.
hybrid show.
Yeah, it was a great show. And I left right after it was over. Kyle stayed and partied, so.
I partied until 5 a.m., which should have been 6.
Oh, yeah, because there is a time change.
But there was a time change.
Yeah.
So we kept being too loud. And then we were like, hey, let's go back over to the big fire pit where we can be loud. And we were on our way over there, and someone was like, oh, crap, it's 5 a.m. And we all just disbanded immediately.
Just disband.
I was real drunk. It was fun. And I am very hungover right now.
Oh, well.
It's great. It was one of those hangovers where I just knew I was doomed. So I just started drinking again. I just finally just cracked a beer this afternoon. I was like, hair of the dog.
Yeah, well, maybe a beer.
A few beers.
Second segment sounds really good, actually, a beer. I had a couple yesterday.
I got him cooling down, oh boy.
Okay, good deal.
Oh man.
Yeah, this is our final recorded episode, in studio before we go to Egypt. Kyle and I are flying out on Wednesday. So by the time you all are hearing this, we will already be en route to Egypt. It should publish Thursday around noon. I'll have to set it up to automatically do that. So we'll probably either be just arriving or close to arriving when you guys get this. So
I'd like to say something else about this show real quick.
Yeah.
This was a small, sort of like a festival that's put on by one of our friends. Really, a friend that we know through Archer, the bassist. And he just was like, man, I want to start a festival. So I think in 2017, he's got property out in Vanderpool. And so he started this thing. He calls it Vanderpoolooza. And it's real small, maybe 150 people to 200 people max.
Yeah.
And he just started booking bands. Has lights strung up under this giant oak grove and a little stage up there. And it's just, it was so much fun.
Yeah.
It was really a great show, and the bands were really great. I don't know. I'm like, man.
It was a lot of fun.
Sign me up next year. Yeah.
Yeah, and is it open for people to buy tickets? I mean, we could get some.
Yeah, so
it could be a snake meetup.
Yeah, so we can send out once he. I mean, there is a max capacity.
Sure.
So once he sells a certain number of tickets, he shuts down.
There's always,
but
a
it's
max
on
capacity.
Eventbrite. So next year when he posts it, and we get the link, we can send it out.
All right.
People can
Good
sign
deal.
up and show up. I think it was like $40 something
Yeah,
a person. So
it was camping and
Yeah.
bands and camping.
lots of fun. Beautiful spot too, and the stars were out. It was a perfect weather, and there were shooting stars all over the place. It was awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
The moon was out, but the bright stars were clearly visible in the moonlight.
Well, I drove home right at dusk, and I almost hit 3 deer on the way. I mean, it was real close. Lots of swerving involved. So, yeah. But didn't hit any.
That's good.
Well, with your hangover, you ready? You ready to dive into
Yeah,
the
let's
path
do
of
it,
the
man.
pole?
Get that.
Welcome, part seveners. You part seveners out there. You guys are
Part 7, our smallest
hanging
crowd yet.
You guys are better than those part sixers that gave up on last episode.
I guess I'll start this. It's late, but
So last week we ended with Hapgood was going through information about how the crust may fracture during a lithosphere shift, and it may create these, like when the crust is moving poleward, it cracks in a certain way, whereas it moves equatorward, it cracks in a different way. And again, I'm skipping. There's like lots of details in here that I've been skipping on this stuff. So if you guys want to, if some of it sounds a little weak when you're listening to it, it's probably because I've skipped enormous amounts of data or information that he's putting in there. I'm just I'm reading enough to give you the basic idea. But if you really want to get Hapgood's full argument, you got to get the book. And again, the links to the book are in the show notes, as always. So Hapgood says, we must now consider a question that relates to mountain building and at the same time involves another of the major unsolved problems of geology. It is connected with our phase of equatorward lithosphere displacement. It has to do with the filling of the fractures by molten magma from below. Campbell considers that this filling of the fractures is the first step in mountain building, or at least in the formation of a geosyncline. Obviously, it is possible to start the process at other points. This is, therefore, only a matter of convenience and for the purpose of drawing a clear picture for the process for the reader. But Campbell points out that the process of the filling of the cracks and the later solidification of the intruded material adds extension of the lithosphere, and there is now more surface. When, in future shifts of the lithosphere, this area passes over the equator toward a pole or moves poleward from where it is, the extended surface has to yield to the resulting compression by folding more than it would have had to do had there been no molten intrusions in the first place. It is therefore reasonable to call this the first step in mountain building, although there is as yet no folding and no uplift of the rock strata. But this question of molten intrusions into the lithosphere raises another vital point. It has been, until now, a very difficult thing to explain the rise of molten matter into the lithosphere. Geologists have speculated as to what force could have shot up the molten matter that formed the innumerable dikes and sills, as these resulting veins are called. They have not been able to agree upon the question. No reasonable explanation of these millions of magmatic invasions of the lithosphere has been found.
wow. I didn't know there was so many.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they form these patterns, and the pattern there is a specific kind of pattern.
I'd like to see a map of that.
Yeah,
That'd be cool.
I know we have a bunch that are exposed south of us down there at Big Bend. There's a bunch of huge magma dikes or lava dikes, basically, that are exposed out there in the desert. And maybe you could hike to one and see it. But you can look at them on Google Earth. They're miles long. These massive walls of volcanic material, basically. It's interesting. Okay, skipping a bunch here. Now we're going to the effects of poleward displacement. In the poleward displacement of sectors of the lithosphere, compression instead of extension would be the rule. The magnitudes and the distribution of forces and the time element would, of course, be the same. Otherwise, the effects would be very different. We should have, in the first place, some folding of the rock strata. As with the fractures, the precise locations of the rock foldings, their number, and their magnitudes would be controlled by the amount of the displacement locally, the local variations of lithospheric strength, which would be less where geosynclines already existed, and the distances of the areas concerned from the central meridian of movement. The amount of the folding would be increased as the result of any previous process of extension of that area of the lithosphere and any previous displacement. So when he's talking about this, the meridian of movement of the displacement, I think he's talking about, so if you just imagine the North Pole we have now, and let's say that let's say there's a pole shift and it's pushing our current North Pole in the direction of, say, Mexico. The meridian of movement is the ring around the Earth that touches both poles that is in that direction, that crosses over Mexico and the poles.
Okay.
Right. And then, so Hapgood's always talking about this because that circle that goes all the way around the globe shows you the areas that undergo the most movement during a shift. And then 90 degrees away from them is the pivot point where there's no movement. Right. 90 degrees away from where it moves. So that would be the pivot point. It's just turning.
Yeah, but it's still got to go from like close to a pole and then go equatorward and vice versa.
Yeah, I just mean that there is a place where there are two places on the planet where all it's doing is rotating.
Right, in this one mathematical point.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the elastic properties of the lithosphere would probably be of much greater importance in this compressive phase.
I was just thinking that would be the axis of the crustal shift. Yeah.
Right, yeah, the axis. And I don't think it's, it's not necessarily, is it clear that...
Because it's not perfectly straight.
Right. Does the lithosphere always just move in a straight line, or could it curve?
There's like dragging too.
Drags, it might turn. Yeah. Okay, so the elastic properties of the lithosphere would probably be of much greater importance in this compressive phase than in the extensive phase of a displacement. This is because compression could lead to flexing or bending of the lithosphere to a slight degree without a permanent change of shape. It might be possible to bend or flex the lithosphere slightly and hold it so for thousands of years without fracture or folding of the rock strata, or even without much plastic flow of the materials. This would mean no permanent change in the conformation of the surface. A compressive tension might be exerted for thousands of years, causing a flexing, and then be relaxed, permitting the lithosphere to return to its original shape. It may be supposed that in areas sufficiently removed from the meridian of maximum displacement, the compressive tensions on the lithosphere might be contained by its tensile strength, and the lithosphere might yield elastically without deformation. If this occurred, however, the total amount of the compression for the whole circumference of the globe would probably be concentrated at comparatively few points, where the compressive stresses happen to be in excess of the strength of the lithosphere. Here, there would be a considerable amount of folding of the rock strata. It is obvious also that these points would tend to coincide with existing geosynclines, which would naturally represent comparatively weak zones where the lithosphere would be less able to withstand the horizontal stress. So again, he's talking about how maybe the process of mountain building and other things like rift valleys and things can be explained by this single underlying principle. If the whole lithosphere can shift, then in one shift where an area is moving from closer to the pole towards the equator, it splits, it cracks, it causes weak areas, and then that might fill up with magma, whatever. And then when it moves poleward again, that's the area where you have weak points, and now it can begin to fold and start to form mountains. So, the mountain building force. Campbell has a most interesting suggestion as to the identity of the force that actually accomplishes mountain folding. He suggests that this is none other than the force of gravity itself. It is his opinion that the shift of the lithosphere merely performs the function of sliding an area to a place where the force of gravity can act upon it. When an area is moved toward a pole, the radius of the Earth are shorter, circumference is shorter, and the surface required is less. There is a surplus of surface, and this, being pulled down closer to the Earth's center by gravity, must fold. From this point of view, it appears that mountains are not pushed up at all, and therefore no lifting force is required. Instead, it is the surface of the Earth that is pulled down by gravity nearer to the Earth's center, as a sector of the lithosphere approaches a pole. Where this happens, the surplus surface must fold. Thus, it is the force of gravity over a large area that folds the lithosphere in a small area. So that's interesting, because one of the questions about mountain building is, where does the force come from to push all that rock so far up? You know, well, Hapgood is suggesting that maybe, and Campbell suggested this earlier, that if it's about a lithosphere displacement, then because there's an equatorial bulge, which can be, it's like miles. If you know, the difference is like 13 miles or something like that from the equator to the pole. So if you rotate the whole thing, slide the crust towards the pole, then what you have is the surface sinks and the mountains are actually just staying where they already were. Instead of having to push up mountains, it's much easier explained as a sinking. Interesting.
Yeah.
So it may help the reader to grasp this idea if he will visualize a flat area on the equator, which, in process of being displaced with the lithosphere as far as a pole, has been folded enough to produce mountains 6 miles high. Now, actually, the peaks of those mountains are no farther from the center of the Earth than the flat area was at the equator. Their altitude, with reference to the Earth's center, is unchanged. What has changed altitude, however, is the rest of the surface outside of the mountain chain. That has been pulled down 6 miles.
That's cool.
What pulled it down, obviously, was the force of gravity, and the reason it was pulled down was that it was first shifted horizontally to a place where gravity could act upon it. Here, then, is the answer to the long-standing enigma of the source of the energy for mountain building. The mountains are not lifted up at all. The surface is pulled down, the force of gravity does the pulling, and folding results where there happens to be excess surface.
Watcher, what's the difference in the polar radius versus like a equatorial radius of the Earth?
Yeah, so he just gave us the equatorial bulge as 43 kilometers or 27 miles. So that just means that's probably in diameter, right? It's not 27 miles difference from the surface somewhere else. So that would be, what, 13 and a half? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 13 and a half miles. Yeah. Okay. Existing fracture systems as evidence for this theory. It is a strong argument in favor of a hypothesis if it enables one to anticipate discoveries. Campbell has shown that the theory of displacements of the Earth's lithosphere calls for the existence of great systems of parallel fractures, intersected by other fractures at right angles to them. It was some time after Campbell began to consider this matter, and quite independently of him, that I became aware of the fact that such fracture patterns do in fact extend over the whole face of the globe, and that geologists are in agreement that their origin is unexplained. Many years ago, Hobbes pointed out that they must have been the result of the operation of some worldwide force. Quote, "The recognition within the fracture complex of the Earth's outer shell of a unique and relatively simple pattern, common to at least a large portion of the surface, obscured though it may be in local districts through the superimposition of more or less disorderly fracture complexes, must be regarded as of the most fundamental importance. It points inevitably to the conclusion that more or less uniform conditions of stress and strain have been common to probably the Earth's entire outer shell," unquote. As I have pointed out, Campbell's projected pattern of fractures is a sort of gridiron, with major fractures paralleling the meridians and minor fractures at right angles to them. In the actual Earth's surface, however, there are two such patterns. One of them consists of north-south fractures paralleling the meridians, intersected by east-west fractures paralleling the equator. The second gridiron is diagonal to the first. These lines run northeast-southwest and northwest-southeast. Hobbes insists that the pattern of these worldwide patterns Hobbes insists that the existence of these worldwide patterns points to a cause acting globally. They could not have been the result of local causes. The force causing the fracturing must have acted simultaneously, so to speak, over a great part of the whole surface of the Earth. Quote, "The results of this correlation possess considerable significance inasmuch as it is clear that over quite an appreciable fraction of the Earth's surface, The main lines of fracture betray evidence of common origin, unquote. The fracturing of the lithosphere under the operation of some global force has been accompanied by much tilting and relative movement of blocks of considerable size, resulting in the alteration of topographic features. One of the earlier geologists, Lapworth, remarked with considerable truth, though with some exaggeration, that, quote, on the surface of the globe, this double set of longitudinal and transverse waves is everywhere apparent. They account for the detailed disposition of our lands and our waters, for our present coastal forms, for the direction, length, and disposition of our mountain ranges and plains and lakes, unquote. So it is clear, I think, from what has already been said, that Lapworth was in error in ascribing the folded mountains to the effects of fracturing alone. However, it may well be that formation of block mountains, such as the Sierra Nevadas, can be accounted for in this way. Innumerable other features of the lithosphere have been formed or obviously much affected by the fracture patterns. Hobbs, for example, has maps of river systems in Connecticut and Ontario, showing how closely the rivers and their tributaries follow the lines of the fracture systems. Many riverbeds, many submarine canyons were never created by subaerial erosion. They were, instead, the results of deep fractures in the lithosphere later occupied by rivers or by the sea.
That's really cool.
So I'm skipping a bunch more stuff in this, but I think that he's basically saying that these two fracture, because he's saying that there's a fracture pattern that basically coincides with the northwest east or north south east west lines on the globe, and then there's another one that's a bit diagonal to that, a second set that looks like it might be older.
Yeah, when the pole was in a
Right.
different position.
Yeah, so he says these fracture patterns may appear and disappear, and the older the fracture pattern from the previous pole position is in the process of being
Erased.
yeah, closed up.
That's cool.
Filled in. But each time it moves, a new fracture pattern is set up. And then after that, you can only find evidence for the really old ones in the dikes.
Really stable,
Yeah,
like places that didn't break up.
right.
That's cool.
Okay. So we have mentioned the oceanographic.
I need a dike map. Watcher. I want to take a look at these dikes.
I would like to see a map of these giant fracture patterns.
I
we're
just
talking
want to
about
see
as
the
well.
first 2 pages of your Google search.
We have mentioned the oceanographic research work, which has recently resulted in tracing a globe encircling crack on the bottoms of the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, and connecting it with the Great Rift Valley in Africa. The pattern that has been traced out is about 45,000 miles long. It is reported that there is seismic activity at present along the whole length of this crack, suggesting recent disturbance of the area and a still continuing process. The Rift Valley, associated with the mid-oceanic ridge, appears to average 2 miles in depth and 20 miles in width. The fact that it is connected with the Rift Valley in Africa, that it bisects Iceland, and apparently invades Siberia indicates that it is not a phenomenon of ocean basins only. The Columbia Research News published by Columbia University in its issue of March 1957 described the discovery thus, quote, in January, Columbia University geologists announced the discovery of a worldwide rift believed to have been caused by the pulling apart of the Earth's crust. The Big Rift traverses the floors of all the oceans and comes briefly to shore on 3 continents in a system of apparently continuous lines 45,000 miles long. Throughout its vast length, the worldwide rift seems to be remarkably uniform in shape, consisting of a central valley or trench averaging 20 to 25 miles in width, and flanked on either side by 75-mile wide belts of jagged mountains rising a mile or 2 above the valley. The peaks of the highest mountains in the system are from 3,600 to 7,200 feet below the ocean's surface, while the long undersea stretches of the Rift Valley itself lie from 2 to 4 miles down. In addition to being marked by its topography, the globe-circling formation is the source of shallow earthquakes that are still going on along its entire length, an indication that if the rift is due to a pulling apart of the Earth's crust, the geological feature is a young and growing one.
Wow. So I know I missed some of that because I was looking at some of the stuff Watcher's posting, but so like the Ring of Fire is basically like a remnant of the.
Yeah, it could be. This is, I don't know. This one is, I don't know if it's part of the Ring of Fire.
No, I'm not that one specifically, but I'm thinking of that as an example of like, here's all these cracks.
Yeah. Yes.
These giant rifts, and they're still like active.
Yeah.
Like they're still bumping
That's right.
and moving around and being filled with lava and stuff.
Yeah. Earth and a source of earthquakes and volcanoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember looking at those maps of the like the sonar scans of the bottom of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the mid-Atlantic ridge.
Yeah.
And there's all those lines like
Yes.
coming up to it, and they're all, I mean, they're very regular.
Right. And that's actually when Hapgood was showing simple maps of the fracture system that Campbell was coming up with, you would have this big north-south crack and then all these
Yeah, east-west cracks.
east-west ones that are coming off of it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great picture of this dike.
Oh, yeah.
Watcher posted.
Yeah,
Look
that
at
is a good one.
Dang.
Yeah.
You can see how
It's just a freaking wall climbing
Yeah.
the mountain. Yeah. Need to build a fort right there.
Yeah.
Okay. So to return briefly to the question of block mountains, Campbell has a further suggestion as to the way in which compression and a poleward displacement may combine with subsequent fracturing to cause them. One of the problems that awaits solution in geology is the cause of the widespread doming and basoning of the lithosphere that occurs from place to place. The domes are sometimes of considerable extent. Examples of basins include the Gulf of Mexico and the Caspian and Black Seas. Campbell points out that if an area is displaced poleward and is thereby subjected to forecompressions, as already mentioned, limited areas will be entrapped by these compressions and doming must result. Conversely, in areas moved equatorward, the reverse must occur and larger or smaller basins will tend to be produced. A block mountain might tend to be produced, Campbell thinks, if a major fault should bisect a domed-up area. This would create the possibility that the abutting rock sections of one half of the dome might give way, allowing half of the dome to collapse and pushing sublithospheric viscous or plastic rock under the other half of the dome, thus rendering the latter permanent. This effect, however, would depend on many local circumstances. So that's interesting. The whole dome collapses, and then the two areas slide over top of each other, and then you end up with these block mountains.
I can't even imagine that.
Yeah.
So wouldn't that theory kind of suggest that that you're going to find more depressions near the equator and more uplifts near the poles? Because he's saying, like, when things go equatorward, you have, like, basins created.
Yeah.
So, I mean, aren't there lots of uplifts and stuff, like, near the equator?
Yeah, that's the thing is it's like that's when they get created. But
then they can stay that way. They can,
okay. Like as long as there isn't too much tension put on that area later by a different movement, they may stay that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was a giant dike near Shiprock. I'd like to go see that too.
Yeah.
Maybe we've seen that from like the highway or something.
Have we been close to that one, or is that one of the ones we've only seen from really far away?
I know we saw Shiprock from far away.
Yeah. So maybe, yeah. We were always looking at that thing way off in the distance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be cool to get close to it and see that wall. Look at that thing.
It's cool.
Yeah, so there was a huge volcano there that's completely gone. All that's left is the volcanic neck, but there's this massive wall of magma coming away from it that obviously was filling up a crack in the crust there.
So cool, dude. Holy crap. Send me more. I don't know if we could see it from Mesa Verde. I don't remember. I think we were looking at it when we were in Arizona, right?
Yeah, but there was also one that Randall was pointing out when we were in Colorado, but it was way
Okay.
out there, but I don't know what it was. If
Maybe that was it,
Maybe
bro.
it was Shiprock, yeah, way out there in the distance. The one that we were looking at in Arizona, we actually were able to get kind of close to it, right?
I know we did get close to one
Yeah.
diatreme.
Okay.
It was
Part
like-
2.
It was called like Captain
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
something.
that's right. Captain something.
Yes.
Volcanism and other questions. In the preceding part of this chapter, I have sketched the principal problems that are basic to the formation of the folded mountains and block mountains, and have examined the planetary fracture systems in the light of Campbell's mechanism for lithosphere displacement. There are, however, a number of other aspects of this general problem that must now engage our attention. We must consider the remarkable phenomena of volcanism in their relationship to lithosphere displacement. In connection with the creation of volcanic mountains, we must consider briefly the question of the origin of the heat of the Earth, an unsolved problem of great interest. We must then examine the relationship of lithosphere displacement and mountain building to the question of changes in the sea level. And finally, we must consider the problem of the chronology of mountain building. Volcanism. We have seen that one kind of mountain is the volcanic mountain. Volcanic phenomena cover a wide range. All of these must be considered in order to see how closely they can be related to a general cause. The phenomena that need explaining include volcanic eruptions, the creation, sometimes rapid, of volcanic mountains on land or in the sea, the genesis of volcanic island arcs, and last but not least, the vast lava flows or lava floods that have at times in the past inundated great areas of the Earth's surface, like the Columbia Plateau would be one of these. All that basalt up there,
Yeah.
just massive outpourings of this stuff.
So Watcher's saying, yeah, you're right. It was Colorado where we were seeing Shiprock because it's in New Mexico, not far from
Yeah.
Mesa Verde National Park. So yeah, I don't know what the name of the other one was. It was in Arizona.
Yeah. Since most volcanoes occur frequently and are the most dramatic manifestations of volcanism, they have been thoroughly studied, and a whole literature has been devoted to them. It is astonishing, therefore, that neither the causes of volcanoes nor the present distribution of volcanic zones on the Earth's surface has as yet received an acceptable explanation. As in the case of other unsolved problems, the absence of certainty has led to a multiplicity of theories. Dr. A.L. Day was formerly director of a geophysical laboratory in Washington. His theory is based upon geophysical experiments conducted in the laboratory. He observed that the crystallization of rock from the molten state resulted in some increase in volume. He assumed that the whole lithosphere was once molten, and that as it cooled, it continued to contain, here and there, comparatively small pockets of molten rock. When such pockets of molten rock finally were cooled to the crystallization point, then expansion would occur, and great pressures would be set up, which might lead to eruption at the surface. This theory is based upon the assumption of the molten origin of the Earth, and carries with it the corollary that volcanic eruptions are essentially local phenomena. Day insisted that volcanoes were not connected with a molten layer under the lithosphere and were not related to events occurring over large areas.
Is that true that it expands when it crystallizes?
I don't know. I thought that was interesting, though, that it's sort of like water and
know,
ice.
I know that, like sometimes when you have dissimilar elements or whatever, when they're crystallizing, they can't, like there's basically holes that
Right.
they can't fill because they're not shaped.
Yeah, it says
symmetrically.
this theory is based on geophysical experiments he conducted in the laboratory. He observed that the
Okay,
crystallization of rock from the molten state resulted in some increase in volume.
Some increase in volume. Okay. All right. Huh.
Okay, let's take a break. We have more people discussing this this problem of volcanism, but we'll get to that after the break.
All right. Cool. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Feeling great here in the Cube tonight. And I'm not 100% on my game tonight, and I completely forgot to introduce the Watcher, who is here with us. Well, not really with us, but he's out there floating in his secret space station.
He's on call in space.
How's it going, Watcher? Keeping an eye on us out there, oh boy.
Pretty good, man. Good to be here. Good to be here. I am on call, but hopefully no calls come. At least not for a couple hours.
Yeah, bro.
It's not quite the full moon, right? So,
Not quite, but
Yeah.
scary enough.
wait, does that even matter in space?
I mean, it's always a full moon.
The
It
whole
just
thing is
depends on
always there.
which way you look. It's only full if you're looking at it.
Okay. So we just heard from Dr. A.L. Day, who says that volcanism maybe can be explained by small pockets of magma trapped in the crystallization of the lithosphere. Now we have Professor R.A. Daly, who bases his opposed theory on his observations of the field evidence of geology. He insisted that only the assumption of a molten layer under the lithosphere could account for the countless facts of igneous geology. His theory is reconcilable either with the assumption of the molten origin of the globe or with the theory of a growing and heating Earth. And again, we have expanding Earth there. He keeps throwing that in there. Jagger, I don't know, objects to Day's view that volcanoes are purely local. He says, there is some reason to think that a very long crack in the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, with interruptions by very deep water, extends all the way from New Zealand to Hawaii, because there are striking sympathies of eruptive data between the volcanoes of New Zealand, Tonga, Samoa, and Hawaii.
Oh.
He then lists a number of eruptions with their dates to show their intimate connection. In particular, he mentions the eruption of August 31st, 1886 on the island of somewhere in Polynesia. Only 2 months before, a volcano was erupted disastrously in New Zealand, indicating volcanic sympathy between two craters hundreds of miles apart on the same general rift in the Earth's crust. These observations imply that a connection may exist, at least in some cases, between volcanoes at great distances from each other.
Wow.
Because of their being located along the same crack in the lithosphere. This implies a connection between the deep fracturing of the lithosphere and volcanism.
Well, the Watcher just got a space call.
He got a call.
Dang it. All right, buddy. Well, you did great.
Yeah.
In the first segment there.
Yeah, he posted some great pics and data. So we have seen that Columbia scientists discovered a vast connected system of rift valleys or cracks in the lithosphere, extending over the surface of the whole planet and associated with constant seismic disturbances. Jagger makes it clear that volcanic eruptions as well as earthquakes may be associated with such rifts. Since the lithosphere is relatively thin, it is reasonable to suppose that the molten rock erupting in volcanoes at great distances from each other must come from below the lithosphere, and that it is not created by any processes occurring within the lithosphere itself. All of this is confirmation of Daly's position. Another theory of volcanic action that should be mentioned briefly is that associated with the name of W.H. Hobbs. It was his view that volcanic action could result from horizontal pressure arcing up a sector of the lithosphere, or arching up. Hobbs. This is based on the fact that if a rock that is too hot to crystallize at normal pressures is subjected to great pressure, it may take the solid state.
Habbo.
Habbo. Hobbs. So, in case you guys don't get that, we're making some Micah Hanks podcast jokes. Okay. So this is based on the fact that if a rock that is too hot to crystallize at normal pressures is subjected to great pressure, it may take the solid state. Subsequently, the release of the pressure is all that is required to restore this rock to its liquid condition. In the lithosphere, considerable amounts of rock may be held in the solid state by the pressure of overlying strata. Then, if horizontal pressure arches the lithosphere, the pressure on the rock below will be relieved, and the rock will resume a liquid state. If the arching results in cracking at the surface or insufficient lateral squeezing of the liquid pockets, eruptions may take place. This effect may account for the vast masses of igneous rock that are found associated with the folded mountain ranges. But it is necessary to ask the question, what causes the arching of the lithosphere? Obviously, volcanism, according to this theory, must be traced to the cause of the arching. Hobbes's theory is not very satisfactory because he cannot explain the arching. Poor Hobbes. It is clear that volcanism might occur as the result either of the process imagined by Day or of that imagined by Hobbes. For several different causes might produce liquid pockets in the lithosphere. But it is equally clear that neither they nor Daly has advanced a theory to account for volcanoes, volcanic zones, plateau basalts, and volcanic mountains. Einstein, when he first received some material outlining the theory proposed in this book, wrote me that it was the only theory he had ever seen that could explain the volcanic zones. Just dropping Einstein's name again.
Yeah.
These, of course, can be explained as zones of fractures, such as the rift valleys just mentioned, resulting from lithosphere displacements. So there's some interesting ideas there on volcanism, like the idea that liquid rock that's hot enough to be liquid may, if under enough pressure from overlying strata or other causes, compression, whatever, would assume a crystalline state. Mm-hmm. And then, if that pressure for whatever reason is relieved, the rock instantly liquefies and then can flow. And if the process that relieves it from the pressure that allows it to liquefy also causes fracturing in the overlying strata, then boom, it can extrude.
I was imagining, like these two, so there's a rift, and somewhere way down in there is magma that's like pushed up into the rift, right?
Yeah.
But there's, of course, solidified and cooled rock on top in the rift.
Yeah, yeah.
But then if some pressure is pushed, it's pushing the two sides of the rift together, it might shoot up, lava somewhere where it's the weakest point.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, like it like pops the plug out. Is
Yeah.
what you're saying. Yes,
And
yes,
the volcano, has the clearest pathway, right?
Yeah.
So if it's a lot of pressure, you might get, more lava coming up through the rift to create more dikes or whatever.
Yeah.
But, which appears to have happened.
yeah,
But it seems to me like it's a sandwiching, right? It's squeezing it together and it's just forcing the lava out.
yes,
But I had
Definitely
always
in the
thought
com-
about volcanism as being more a process of like the forces of the magma being under pressure in the first place. Like it wants to
Yeah.
pop out of there.
yeah.
But this is interesting, like thinking of it in terms of it being sandwiched in between two plates or something and then them squeezing together.
Yeah. One of the things he talks about in the section where he's describing the movement causing fracture. So movement equatorward will cause fractures that tend to split the crust apart. Right? So he talks about this as in the same way as if you have a big floating ice sheet on water. If it shatters, then the individual pieces will sink a little bit or whatever. They'll come to they'll continue to float, but water will
Come up
flow
between
up
them. Yeah,
in between, and then it reaches a new level.
Right.
And so he's saying that may be what happens, and so the pressure is relieved. The material
Yeah,
will flow up.
yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to pour out and cover the whole surface.
Right. In some places it will. Probably.
In some places it will because there's not enough fracturing to relieve all the pressure. So that may be how you end up with stuff like that with these long walls. The other thing is that he said that when the lithosphere, Campbell was talking about when the lithosphere moves equatorward, the cracks will start from the bottom.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if you did have like a big crack that formed through the middle of a very large piece, you'd probably have stuff come flowing out.
Sure,
Of it.
yeah. Yeah. And all this is made way more complicated by the fact that the lithosphere is thinner and thicker in places
yeah.
and then is made of all this different material and has weaknesses and
Yeah.
So maybe you can see like large general patterns, but really it's going to be extremely complicated. Okay. Where was I here? Okay. It is clear that volcanism might occur as the result either of the process imagined by Day or of that imagined by Hobbes for several different causes might produce liquid pockets in the lithosphere. But it is equally clear that neither they nor Daly have advanced a theory to account for volcanoes, volcanic zones, plateau basalts, and volcanic mountains. I think I did read this, yeah. Okay. The heat of the Earth. The origin of the Earth's heat is one of the most important of the unsolved problems of geology. Gutenberg says, several hypotheses have been proposed to explain the origin of the Earth's internal heat, but at present only two fundamental heat sources are postulated: radioactivity and gravitational contraction. A vast amount of research has been devoted to this subject, but the fact remains that the origin and maintenance of the Earth's internal heat continue to be one of the outstanding unsolved problems of science.
What does he mean by gravitational attraction? Like tidal forces?
Gravitational contraction. So the force of gravity causing pressure resulting in heat, I think. But maybe he is talking about
That seems
tidal forces.
weird because if had plenty of time to cool off, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Is it possible to have it? I don't know. I guess
thought that there was like some idea that there were tidal forces involved with the moon and the stuff, and that might be keeping things stirred up down there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that plus radioactivity plus the pressure. Okay. So it may be noted that, according to Gutenberg, the assumption of an originally molten condition of the Earth plays no part in the present attempts to explain the Earth's heat. This is a measure of how very far geological science has moved from that conception and serves to underline still further the danger of falling back upon it for the solution of problems in geology. Gravitational contraction has been deemed insufficient to account for the Earth's heat, even if augmented by heat produced by radioactive elements in the rocks. There is serious doubt that radioactivity adds much to the heat of the Earth. Smart, for example, is of the opinion that radioactivity cannot produce heat in the Earth as fast as it can be radiated through the lithosphere into outer space. Daly thought he saw evidence that the heat gradient within the Earth in America differs from that in Europe, being somewhat steeper in North America. This would imply that there is more heat in North America than in Europe. Benfield produced much more evidence of variations in heat from place to place, which are difficult to reconcile with a uniform heat gradient in the Earth. A matter of great importance for the general problem is the rate at which heat migrates through the lithosphere and is thus dissipated into outer space. Geophysicists have determined that the rate of heat migration through the lithosphere is extremely slow. Jeffreys calculated that it would take 130 million years to cool a column of sedimentary rock 7 miles below the Earth's surface by 250 degrees Celsius. As a result of this, the climate of the Earth's surface is determined entirely by the radiant heat of the sun and is uninfluenced by heat from within. We shall have to consider the bearing of this on another well-known fact, which is that earthquakes and other movements within the lithosphere are known to produce heat as a consequence of friction between the moving lithospheric blocks. Then, earthquakes are most frequent in areas where there are distortions of the gravitational balance of the lithosphere, while heat gradients are steeper in such areas. This indicates that any factor causing such distortions may be a factor in the production of the Earth's heat. Considering these facts, what are the implications, so far as the Earth's heat is concerned, of a displacement of the lithosphere? Can there be any doubt that a movement continuing over a period of several thousand years must generate an immense quantity of heat within itself? There can be no doubt of this. The widespread fracturing, the friction between lithospheric blocks resulting from the increased number of earthquakes could have no other result. Moreover, Franklin has pointed out that friction between the lithosphere and the layer over which it moves must produce heat, which may itself facilitate the displacement. The heat thus produced would migrate both inward into the body of the Earth and outward into space. But since the rate of dissipation of this heat is so extremely slow, it follows that displacements at relatively short intervals might produce heat more rapidly than it could be dissipated. Over hundreds of millions of years, slight increments of heat from this source may have accumulated to produce the Earth's present temperature. The assumption of frequent lithosphere displacements thus suggests a third possible source of the Earth's heat, in addition to those mentioned by Gutenberg. So when I was reading this, I was thinking, okay, well, the displacement of the lithosphere takes as part of its assumptions that there is molten stuff for the lithosphere to slide around on.
Right, so that would be a source of heat.
It can't be. It could be the source of the continual heat.
Yeah.
The reason it hasn't completely cooled off yet, but it can't be the source of the heat originally. Otherwise, you would just have a solid ball of rock and there's no lithosphere to slide around.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I thought of was that there must be an upper limit to this, because the other problem he's suggesting that, well, multiple slidings of the lithosphere produces more heat than can be radiated. So does that mean that the temperature is just going to continue to increase on the inside of the Earth until the whole lithosphere melts? Or it gets thinner and thinner and thinner?
Yeah.
So there must be an upper limit. Like, clearly at some point the lithosphere and the temperature, if crustal shift is what's taking place, there must be some point at which the lithosphere can radiate enough heat from the internal portions of the Earth to keep...
If you get a bunch of cracks and it opens up and all that lava flows out, that's releasing a shit ton of heat.
Right, and allowing it to cool and yeah. radiate the heat
The
out
cool,
into space.
the thing I was thinking about, which is really cool, is this idea of this a source of earthquakes being the uneven cooling
Yeah.
of the tectonic plates or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So as they cool, they change in volume, or they get more rigid,
Yep.
right? So it's like you see this with, I don't know, like glass or something like that, where if you melt it and then it's cooling unevenly, it'll crack.
Yep.
So yeah, I was just thinking about that. Like, man, if there was some source of maybe turbulence, I don't know what's going on under there, but you get like something happening in the mantle that like brings a bunch more heat to the underside of the plate and starts heating it there while it's cooling in some other place, and it starts bowing or flexing or something.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's interesting. I never thought of that before.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. And does the lithosphere really, is it just floating on that molten surface? Like in the same way that ice floats on water?
Yeah.
It's got to be more complicated than that, right? Because that would imply that beneath the mountains there are massive amounts of material. I mean, maybe that is true. I know.
What do you mean? Beneath the mountains, there are massive amounts of material.
Well, if it's like, if you think of it as in terms of like ice, like glacial ice or whatever.
the higher the glacier
Yeah, so if
sticking
there's a
out of the
massive
water.
mountain chain, there must be something similar beneath that's allowing
it
that
to
stuff
be
float.
buoyant.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, probably. I mean,
Because I guess
So, like,
if
the crust
if the
is
crust
thicker
is
with-
folding, it should fold in both directions, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's thicker where there are mountains.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay.
So that would seem to like also act to lock the crust in place. Like they'd be like,
Yeah, it seems like those would be impediments to it sliding around.
Yeah.
I thought the same thing.
but if some greater force did force it to slide, then it would be creating all this turbulence in the magma underneath it as it moved along.
Yeah.
Just dragging this like this inverted mountain through the magma
Right. The magma has to flow.
down and then back
Down
up
and
the other
back up,
side
yes.
and create vortexes behind it and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yep.
Man.
And maybe that stuff breaks off, and then you end up with these big blobs.
Then the mountain sinks.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay, so if it is true, as Daly thought, that the heat gradient is steeper in North America than in Europe, this fact serves as additional confirmation of a displacement of the lithosphere at the end of the Pleistocene.
If the what is steeper?
The heat gradient.
Oh.
Like, in other words, in Europe, as you dig down, there's a heat gradient, but it takes longer. You have to dig deeper to get as hot as you do in North America.
Okay.
Like a shallower hole will be the same temperature as a much deeper one. In Europe, the heat gradient is steeper here. So, yeah, Hapgood says this could be a confirmation of the displacement, because he says, I have already presented evidence to suggest that the lithosphere moved at that time in such a direction as to bring North America down from the pole to its present latitude. If this occurred, it meant a displacement of about 2,000 miles for eastern North America, but only about 500 miles for western Europe.
Okay.
Quite obviously,
Because it's closer to the axis of the
yeah,
rotating
right.
crust.
So quite obviously, the friction must be proportional to the amount of the displacement, and therefore friction and resulting heat could be expected to be somewhat greater in the
cool.
Americas.
That's a really interesting observation.
So to return now to our plateau basalts, we may observe that in a situation where the lithosphere was continuously in motion over an extended period, A buildup of heat in the lithosphere might cause considerable melting in its lower parts, where the temperature was already very close to the melting points of the rocks. This increase of heat would link itself quite naturally, therefore, to an increase in the number and intensity of volcanic eruptions and to lava flows of all kinds. By means of these eruptions and flows, some of the heat would be dissipated into the air. Much of it, however, imprisoned in the lower part of the lithosphere, would simply increase the volume of the molten magmas. A massive displacement of the lithosphere, because of the oblateness of the Earth, must produce temporary distortions of its shape and gravitational imbalance of the lithosphere. The force of gravity subsequently must gradually force the lithosphere to resume its normal position. This, of course, involves great pressure upon the lithosphere and upon the molten and semi-molten material under or within the lithosphere. Pressures of this kind might occasionally lead to the eruption of plateau basalts. It must not be supposed, however, that every displacement of the lithosphere must inevitably produce lava floods. The latter would perhaps be the result of an unusual combination of pressures and fractures. The same combination of forces which might, in one situation, produce volcanic mountains and island arcs might, under other circumstances, produce a doming up of the lithosphere in a local area or a lava flood.
I just had an idea. So, what if we've talked about what might cause precession, and I know he mentioned this earlier in the book, but
Yeah.
it's always been weird how the precessional wobble is in the reverse direction to the spin of the Earth,
Yep.
right? Which is like you tested out on that gyroscope. Like it always wants to go with.
Yeah.
This
Which
precession-
I assumed was latent drag from the bearing, which the Earth doesn't have a bearing, so maybe it can precess in the opposite direction.
But my thought was that if you figure you've got this spinning, you take the spinning Earth, and then while it's spinning, then you rotate the crust on it.
yeah.
And that might cause
Yes.
some strange alteration of its axis.
Yeah.
And so it would be like really crazy if ancient civilizations actually witnessed the moving of the pole, the shifting of the crust, as Mario Buildrep's suggesting.
Yeah.
Which is why they later then became obsessed with like checking what it did.
Yeah.
And so then they find the wobble,
Oh, yeah.
right? They're like, okay, now we have this wobble.
Yeah.
Or maybe the wobble is like an indication, like, okay, if we monitor this, we'll know, like, if it gets worse,
Yeah.
that it's about to shift again.
Right. Yeah, it could definitely be an explanation for why they were so obsessed with checking positions of stars
That's
over
what I
long
mean.
periods of time. Because like if stuff starts to drift, you're
Yeah,
like,
you're
oh,
like,
crap,
okay, it's
the
coming.
crust is moving again. Yeah. Yeah, we're all in trouble.
Dude, that's cool.
Oh man.
5 unlucky days.
Yeah. I've seen some people in the YouTube comments saying that this is about to happen again. They're like, it's coming, bro. Crust is gonna shift, man. 2025. Maybe it is. You never know. Okay. Changing sea levels. An important problem closely related to that of mountain building is that of the cause of very numerous and in some cases radical changes in the elevations of land areas relative to the sea level. Umgrove finds that mountain folding has been related in geological time to uplift of land areas or to withdrawal or regression of the sea. However, it is clear that the uplifts were not confined merely to the folded areas, that is, to the mountains themselves, but affected larger regions. Such uplifts, where whole sections of the lithosphere were elevated without being folded, are referred to as epirogenic uplifts, to distinguish them from the uplifts of the folded mountain belts, which may have resulted from the folding itself, and which are referred to as orogenic uplifts. As to the extent of the resulting changes in sea level, Umgrove says, quote, The most important question concerns the depth to which the sea level was depressed in distinct periods of intense regression. In other words, the extent of the change to which the distance between the surface of the continents and the ocean floors was subjected during the pulsating rhythm of subcrustal processes. Joly was the only one who approached this question from the geophysical side, and he arrived at an order of 1,000 meters, unquote. So it becomes necessary, therefore, to find a connection between the cause of the folding of the lithosphere and the cause of general or epirogenic changes of elevation of continents and seafloors. Fortunately, this problem is not really so difficult as it may seem at first glance. That it can be solved in terms of the assumption of displacements of the lithosphere is, I think, clear from the following considerations. Gutenberg has pointed out that if a sector of the lithosphere in gravitational equilibrium at the equator is displaced poleward by a shift of the whole lithosphere, it will be moved to a latitude where gravity is greater because gravity increases slightly towards the poles. Its weight will thereby be increased, and to remain in gravitational equilibrium, it must seek a lower level. It must subside. The water level in the higher latitudes adjusts easily, of course. Gutenberg points out, however, that if the movement of the lithosphere occurs at a rate greater than the rate at which the sector may sink by displacing viscous material from below itself, the result will be that the sector will stand for a time higher relative to sea level than it did before. So that's an interesting thing he's talking about. So when he's basically saying that when the crust moves towards the pole, it needs to sink. And over time, it will eventually. But if the movement is too quick, for a while, it may actually sit up much higher than it will eventually be as it sinks down. But the sea, being liquid, is able to adjust quickly. So for a time, you have what looks like a continental area pushed way much farther out from the sea level than it would normally be, and then it will slowly sink in. That's the description that was given there. So Hapgood says, I give Gutenberg's own words, quote, movements of the Earth's crust relative to its axis must be accompanied by vertical displacements. A block with a thickness of 50 kilometers in equilibrium near the equator should have a thickness of 49.8 near the poles to be bounded by the same equipotential surfaces there. If it moves towards a pole, it must sink deeper to keep in equilibrium. If the process is too fast for maintenance of isostatic equilibrium, positive gravity anomalies and regressions are to be expected. Thus, regression may be an indication that an area was moving toward a pole, and transgressions that it was moving toward the equator.
I guess I'm gonna look those up.
Look what up?
Regressions and transgressions are the
Yeah, regressions of the sea and transgressions. So regression means the sea pulls away.
Goes away. Okay, got it.
Transgressions means the sea's covering it over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought he was talking about the land masses or something.
Yeah. So yeah, if the process of the lithosphere movement is too fast for maintenance of isostatic equilibrium, then you get gravity anomalies and the ocean is either covering up land or retreating from it for a while until the until the isostatic response can happen.
Yeah, so I wonder if that's what was going on here, because like apparently, these were shallow inland seas that came and went multiple times.
Yeah.
Like what was causing that?
Yeah.
Now the whole thing's lifted up.
Right.
And it's sloped too. It's sloped in one direction, I think.
Tilted, yeah. So there you have a tilting of a whole area of lithosphere.
Yeah. And
Plus-
it's all heavily eroded.
Yeah.
So it's like, I wonder how catastrophic those coming and goings of the sea were.
Right. Yeah, so if it was moved closer and farther from the pole each time.
No, the sea it can't be responsible for the erosion. It has to be rainfall.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just weird. I've always wondered about that. How does it just come and go?
And do this over and over and over. Like he's quoted multiple geologists in this saying, like, wait a minute, everywhere you look, you see that over large land masses. The ocean has been here and left and been back and left.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
You've got coal, which means you got a peat bog, and then you have
Giant thing.
marine sediments, and then coal, and then marine sediments, and then shallow marine sediments with fossils, and then coal, just back and forth. Okay. According to Gutenberg, an area, well, actually, we need to take a break.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll get to what is according to Gutenberg after the break.
All right.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Second half of the show, third segment, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, part 7, Path of the Pole. Again, I really recommend you get the book. Links are in the show notes. And I'm just gonna continue on here because we want to find out what was according to Gutenberg. So, according to Gutenberg, an area moved about 6,000 miles from the equator to a pole would stand about 1,200 or 1,400 feet higher above sea level if the speed of the displacement was too rapid for maintenance of gravitational equilibrium. The speed of displacement that is suggested by the evidence I have presented is such as to eliminate the possibility that the lithospheric sector could sink and remain in gravitational equilibrium.
So I don't understand this. Are they saying because as it moves northward, it's getting closer to the center of gravity so that the gravitational force is going to be stronger there, and so eventually it will sink? Like, this doesn't make sense.
Gravitational force is a little stronger as you move toward the pole because there's less centripetal force.
Okay.
So the spin
Yeah.
is what results in the
In the
bulge.
bulge.
And that's because there's less centripetal force, or there's centripetal force out there pushing it outwards, right?
Yeah.
And so since the lithosphere is, in general, it wants to stay rigid. If you move the whole thing, stuff moving from the equator towards the pole, it's going to want to stay in the same,
Yeah, it's being compressed against itself.
and it's also wants to stay at the same elevation. So it has to fall miles as it moves
Yeah.
towards the pole. So what?
But it's
So
like,
what this is saying is it's not miles, 1,200 feet, 12 to 1,400 feet.
it creates this mental image of it like sort of being suspended above the lava under there, which is not
Yeah.
happening.
I guess
It's like so as it moves poleward, it would be like relieving pressure off the magma.
Yeah, it's relieving pressure.
And so the magma is probably expanding under
Yep.
there.
Yeah.
It's weird. I don't. Not sure I'm buying that one, but it's hard to imagine that it would move so fast that it's not going to. That it's going to basically lift itself up somehow.
It's not lifting itself up. It's failing
That
to
the
fall.
ground is falling out from underneath
It's
it.
failing to fall.
Yeah.
Well, we do know that isostatic response takes a while, so they're making calculations based on this stuff.
Yeah, we don't know that though. That's an assumption. We've never witnessed
Well, it is still happening.
a rapid isostatic response.
No, we haven't.
But there's not necessarily evidence that it can't go fast.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just assumed that it takes millions and millions and millions and millions of years.
Yeah. But I think in some cases, I think what these guys are doing is they're just saying, look, this probably doesn't ever happen, but here is what would happen if it didn't sink. You end up with
Yeah.
it being this much farther above sea level, whatever. And so it's never going to stay that, it's never going to be at the maximum extent, but it might be some,
Yeah.
you know. So he's saying that if you took an area from the equator and moved it all the way to the pole and you did it really fast where it nothing had time to have any isostatic response, then you have this certain lift above sea level.
1,400 feet or whatever. Yeah. So he's not claiming that that's what happens. He's just like, this would be the maximum.
Yeah.
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 Because I'm thinking of it like pushing a rock down a slope. You know what I mean? How fast do you have to push that rock before it actually gets airborne? That's what I'm thinking, right? It's like it slopes down, like from the equator. It's like a downhill ride to the pole.
Yes.
So it's hard to imagine this gigantic rock that's moving up there, moving fast enough to where it's not just sitting on the slope on the whole time. That it's somehow going to stay lifted, like that. The slope is going to fall out from underneath this massive rock. It just doesn't compute. Sorry. It's hard for me to like think.
Yeah, again, I think that in general they're speaking in theoreticals here or hypothetical situations.
Yeah.
Cuz it's again, you imagine the thing as a rigid hollow sphere. The lithosphere is a rigid hollow sphere. Or it has rigidity. It's not fully rigid. And then if you rotate the whole thing, then there may be some areas where it doesn't fall fast enough.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying is you're having a hard time believing that a 600 square mile giant piece of stone fails to fall.
Now it'd be one thing if
But
it
it
was like,
fails to fall because it's being held against all this other stuff around it. Like this happens in architecture all the time. That's the purpose of a keystone.
yeah.
It fails to fall
Yeah.
because it's being pressed up against a bunch of other stone around it.
Yeah.
So maybe you have a keystone effect for a while in certain areas until other places allow it to sink,
Yeah. I can kind of see it like it's filling in underneath it with magma or something. Because there's not going to just be a gap.
No, but magma can expand.
Yeah, it's going to expand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where was I at here?
It's hard to imagine.
So the speed of displacement that is suggested by the evidence I have presented is such as to eliminate the possibility that the lithospheric sector could sink and remain in gravitational equilibrium. Consequently, by our theory, a poleward movement of any sector of the lithosphere will result in uplift and a regression of the sea. In addition, it appears to me that since any sector displaced poleward would also be compressed laterally, this would offer another obstacle to its subsidence. It would have to overcome the lateral pressures as well as displace underlying material. The amount of the uplift of an area displaced poleward would depend, of course, on the amount of the displacement. As has already been made clear, much geological evidence appears to suggest that displacements may have amounted on the average to no more than a third of the distance from a pole to the equator. If this is true, then the resulting uplift to be expected should be of the order of about 1/3 of the uplift Gutenberg suggested, or from 400 to 500 feet. Now, listen, I saw that number and I was like, well, that's exactly
How much the sea
level
rose.
was supposed to have changed. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So there is still another factor that may affect sea levels, but in an unpredictable way. It seems clear for several reasons that a displacement of the whole lithosphere must result in considerable readjustments and redistribution of material of different densities on the underside of the lithosphere. While these can hardly be predicted, they must affect the elevation of points at the Earth's surface. Geologists believe that the underside of the lithosphere has unevenness corresponding to those at the surface, and that the lithosphere varies considerably in thickness from place to place. They think, for example, that the lithosphere is thicker under the continental surfaces and thinner under the oceans, and that it is thickest of all under mountain ranges and high plateaus. Continents and mountain ranges not only stick up higher, but they also stick down deeper. That is because they are composed on an average of lighter rock. The analogy is to an iceberg. An iceberg floats with 1/10 of its mass above sea level and 9/10 of it submerged. It is lighter than water per unit volume and floats in the water, displacing its own weight and leaving its own excess volume above the surface. Continents and mountain chains stand in the same sort of hydrostatic balance. Their downward projections are thought to be much greater than their upward visible projections. The downward projections of mountain chains are called mountain roots. So there it is.
Mountain roots.
Mountain roots. And he's saying that it's actually much greater.
Yeah,
And remember that guy, that geophysicist in the lab was showing like, yeah, once you crystallize it, it's got a little bit more volume.
Yeah.
So it would be similar to floating. If you had a pool of magma and you dropped a rock of that same stuff, solidified, crystallized into it, it would float just barely. Just a tiny bit of it would have.
Yeah, because its mass is
Just the excess volume would stick
the
above the
excess
surface.
volume. Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause- Yeah. Yeah.
So
a
if
good
if that's true, then a mountain chain must have an enormous amount of material
Yeah.
down in the magma.
Yeah. But there also could be giant blobs in the mantle that are holding up some mountains.
That's true. We know there are blobs.
But what was I going to say? Well, never mind. I'll think of it. Go ahead. Go on.
The underside of the lithosphere, then, has a sort of negative geography. The features of the upper surface are repeated in reverse on the undersurface, although naturally the details are missing. The effects are rather smoothed out. We should expect that the Rocky Mountains would make a sizable bump on the underside of the lithosphere, but we couldn't expect to find any small, sharp bump just under Pikes Peak. The tensile strength of the lithosphere, though limited, is sufficient to smooth out the minor features. As we attempt to envisage the situation at the bottom of the lithosphere, we must remember that the rocks are subjected to increasing pressure with depth and probably to increasing heat, and as a consequence, they must tend to lose their rigidity and strength. We do not just come suddenly to the boundary of the lithosphere at a given depth. On the contrary, the lithosphere just fades away. The rocks of the lowest part of the lithosphere must be very weak indeed, so that a very slight lateral pressure may suffice to displace them. So he's suggesting there, I think, that these massive extrusions beneath mountain chains may actually just break
Get
off,
shoved off, yeah.
and end up being blobs, right, in the lithosphere or in the magma.
Yeah. So the other thing I was thinking of that I had previously forgotten was if something like that happens, then you have this giant mountain and then it just lays down,
Yeah.
right? Tilting all this, the strata and everything. And maybe like lifting up some other thing. Because like that huge, I don't know if it's a monocline in Arizona that we were driving up to near Mexican Hat, I think it was. And you could just see the whole, the strata just curving down. I mean, it was massive and just, I mean, overwhelmingly huge. Mm-hmm. This just beautiful, like curving strata just going down, just diving right into the ground.
That's right. Yeah.
So I was thinking about that being like, it used to be a flat surface supported by all this structure underneath.
Yeah.
Then something sheared it off and it just fell.
It just falls in. Yep.
To reach equilibrium, to buoyancy or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and so
That's cool.
it's really interesting to go through all this and you see how you can begin to understand maybe that these processes are what creates these giant folds and
another thing would be if something happened on the surface, like a huge tidal wave type or just a crazy what was it, sheet flood?
yeah.
That just like cuts out thousands of feet of rock and stuff, that there would be an uplift afterwards. Like because if there was like a lot of material on there, then you scrape off a whole bunch of mass, then it's going to float
Yeah,
more.
should rise up. Yep.
And so then you'll get these big tilted monoclines or
Yeah.
anticlines
Yeah.
from that. That's cool. Learning me.
And then, of course, the place where that sheet flood deposits all that stuff is going to sink. All that stuff that it carried away.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Grand Canyon should flatten out.
It should lift up and just flatten out. It follows that when lateral pressures develop during a displacement of the lithosphere, as the downward projections of continents and mountains are brought to bear against the upward extension of the viscous layer below the ocean basements, large blobs of this soft rock of lesser density will be detached from the undersides of the continents or mountain ranges and will get shifted to other places. So there you go. That's an explanation for the blobs.
Well, those blobs are huge, dude. They're like,
Yeah.
it's not a mountain range blob.
No.
I'm pretty sure they're like, I'll have to look them up.
Too big to have
They're
been part of a mountain range. It could have been a really big mountain. It could be a blob from an entire continent.
Yeah.
If, as a result of this shifting around, the average densities of vertical columns extending from the bottom to the top of the lithosphere get changed, then there will eventually be corresponding changes of elevation at the surface. So like you said,
Here it is. A massive blob of material under Africa could be contributing to that continent's upheaval.
yes. So it's helping hold it up. Is that the idea?
Yeah, there are two giant blobs deep within the mantle. One sits under Africa while the other is almost precisely opposite the first under the Pacific Ocean.
Oh.
But these two blobs are not evenly matched. New research finds that the blob under Africa extends far closer to the surface and is more unstable than the blob under the Pacific. This difference could ultimately help to explain why the crust under Africa has been lifted upward and why the continent has seen so many large supervolcano eruptions over hundreds of millions of years.
Oh, okay.
Cool, dude. Hey, Hapgood is onto something here.
Okay. If, as a result of this shifting around, the average densities of vertical columns extending from the bottom to the top of the lithosphere get changed, then there will eventually be a corresponding change of elevation at the surface, right? So some areas, as a result, tend to rise and others to sink.
Yeah.
This could account naturally for changes of sea level and for many topographical features such as basins and plateaus. To sum up the question of sea levels, it appears that the assumption of displacements of the lithosphere, especially if they are considered to have been numerous, may help to explain them. It seems able to explain why glaciated areas, which we consider to have been areas displaced poleward, appear to have stood higher relative to sea level, and why periods of warm climate in particular regions appear to have been associated with reduced elevation of the land and transgressions of the sea. The theory seems to satisfy Umgrove's conclusion that sea level changes have resulted from some world-embracing cause. It accounts, too, for Butcher's suggestion that regressions of the sea have resulted from sublithospheric expansion and transgressions from sublithospheric contraction, for this obviously is only another way of looking at a displacement of the lithosphere. If an area is displaced poleward, the effect of sublithospheric contraction is created. If it is displaced equatorward, the effect of sublithospheric expansion occurs. At the same time, it provides an explanation for the rhythmic changes of sea levels throughout geological history that so mystified Grabau. And he quotes him as saying, "This rhythmic succession and essential simultaneousness of the transgressions as well as the regressions in all the continents indicates a periodic rise and fall of the sea level, a slow pulsatory movement due apparently to alternate swelling and contraction of the sea bottoms."
Man, this is crazy, dude. Hangover is gone.
The podcast is the cure. Or it's that beer.
Yeah, this beer is helping me out too.
Undisturbed sections of the lithosphere. So it has been objected that there exist extensive areas where rock formations appear to have been little disturbed over great periods of time. If the lithosphere has been displaced as often as is required by this theory of displacement, why would not the lithosphere be universally folded to a far greater extent than it is? I think this objection has been partly answered where I pointed out that in a single displacement of the lithosphere, the folding would be comparatively slight and that it would be confined to a small part of the Earth's entire surface. I have suggested that it would be greatest along the meridian of the lithosphere's maximum displacement, but that at some point between this meridian and the two areas suffering no displacement, the compressions would tend to fall below the elastic limit of the lithospheric rocks, so that the lithosphere would simply bend elastically and then return to the original apparently undisturbed position in some subsequent movement. It may be added that most of the changes of elevation resulting from a displacement of the lithosphere would tend to be epirogenic. That is, they would be broad uplifts or subsidences of large regions resulting from the tilting of great segments of the lithosphere, rather than merely local deformations of the rock structures. Another point that may be urged in answer to this objection is that apparently over considerable periods, the poles have tended to remain in approximately the same areas, resulting in leaving some areas far removed for long periods from the meridian of maximum displacement of the lithosphere.
What does that mean?
That when you trace the pole back, it looks like it's kind of circling. It, there's not a massive movement where you have an area on the equator go all the way to the pole.
Yeah.
So basically the area of the pole moves 30 degrees in one direction, and then that happens again, and that, and it sort of stays around in that general area. So you have
areas of the world that don't really ever move much.
Or haven't been there in a long time.
Yeah.
You get these regimes where, so every once in a while, maybe in a really massively long amount of time, you get a couple of movements in a row that move it in the same direction or close to the same direction. And then you get a long period of that area sort of floating around the polar axis.
I wonder if it's kind of like, if you could map it out like over all of time, that it would be like some interesting Fibonacci spiral.
Oh,
going all
probably.
around.
It probably would be. Yeah. Okay. So the chronology of mountain building. Another objection that may be raised to this theory of mountain building is that there are supposed to have been only a few great mountain building epochs in the world's history of 3 or 4 billion years, and that these epochs have been separated by very long periods when mountains were eroded away and no new ones formed. I shall indicate 2 reasons for holding that this concept is an illusion. The first reason is that the record of the rocks is incomplete. It has been estimated that if all the original sedimentary beds of all geological periods were added together, that is, the entire amount of sediment that has been weathered out of the mountains and continents and accumulated to make sedimentary rocks since the beginning of geological time, the total thickness of sediment would be about 80 miles. At the present time, however, the average thickness of the existing sedimentary rocks at any one point on the lithosphere is estimated to be no more than 1.5 miles. What has happened to all the missing sediment? The answer is that it has been used over again. At the present time, all over the earth, the forces of the weather and the sea are busy wearing away or grinding up rock, and most of the rock they are destroying is sedimentary rock. Thus, more than 95% of all the sedimentary rocks formed since the beginning of the planet have been destroyed. As a result of this, geologists have been forced to piece together this geological record from widely separated beds. They find a part of the Silurian sediment in the United States and another piece of it in Africa, and so on. The enormous difficulty of piecing together the geological record from these discontinuous and scattered beds is rendered even greater by the fact that vast areas of what were once lands are now under the shallow epicontinental seas, and even under the deep sea, as we shall see in the next section. Let us remember, too, that even among the still existing beds now to be found on the lands, only a tiny percentage are at or near the surface and thus available for study. And of these, a large proportion are in such remote and geologically unexplored areas as Mexico, the Amazon, and Central Asia. And still, despite these enormous handicaps, new periods of mountain formation are constantly being discovered. Umgrove remarks that a long list of them has been gradually disclosed to us. So it seems to me that there is unjustified complacency in the assumption that the list of mountain-forming epochs is now complete. How can we reach a reasonable guess as to the number that remain undiscovered? The second reason for holding that the idea of rare mountain-building periods is quite illusory is perhaps even more persuasive. It seems that a remarkable error has vitiated the interpretation of the evidence regarding these alleged periods. The error has been exposed by the development of nuclear methods of dating recent geological events, already referred to, which may have revealed an unexpected rapid rate of geological change. The error, I think, consists in interpreting the geological evidence on the assumption that conditions are revealed in a particular deposit in one area necessarily determine worldwide conditions. Thus, evidence of an ice age in a particular deposit in one place has been interpreted as meaning a period of lower temperature for the entire world at that time. In the same way, mountain building revolutions were assumed to affect all parts of the world at once. The idea that mountain building might go on one continent while another went scot-free was not entertained. The contemporaneousness of these events in different parts of the world rested, as we shall see, upon a very vague idea of geological time. The techniques for dating the older geological formations never did and do not now allow reliable conclusions regarding the contemporaneousness of mountain building on different continents any more than they permit such conclusions regarding climate changes. Margins of error amounting to millions of years must always be allowed. Triassic folding in India need not be contemporary with Triassic folding in North America, because the Triassic period is estimated to have lasted about 35 million years. Calculations of the rates at which the weather wears away mountains have shown that mountain ranges may be worn away in much less time than that. Thus, we cannot place reliance on the accepted notions of the occurrence of mountain building revolutions in time and space, but must hold that the process was, in all probability, much more continuous than has been supposed, but confined to smaller parts of the Earth's surface at any one time. Further support for this view is provided by the geologist Stokes, who remarks, in connection with the history of the Rocky Mountains, quote, "Although the Rocky Mountain or Laramide Revolution is popularly supposed to have occurred at the transition from the Cretaceous to the Tertiary, it has become increasingly evident that mountain building was continuous from place to place, from the late Jurassic or early Cretaceous, and that deformation continued through the early Tertiary and Quaternary," unquote. In other words, mountain building went on continuously in North America from the Jurassic period, about 100 million years ago, into the Pleistocene epoch, which is considered to have come to an end 10,000 years ago. This is excellent evidence in support of the conclusion that, in all probability, none of the alleged mountain building revolutions occurred at all. So I thought that was interesting because I do remember reading about that, you know, the mountain building periods were, they all happened a long time ago and there were only a few of them. And the most recent one was a long time ago and it's over, right?
Yeah.
But Hapgood is saying, and other geologists are agreeing with him, that basically mountain building is probably a continuous process. It's an ongoing thing. The idea that there were these ancient mountain building epochs that stopped is just outdated.
I was wondering how the new techniques of dating rock and stuff might have affected the theories, the models for the mountain building phases now. Because like you can, like, don't we have all these? Are they still? I can't remember. We did this a long time ago. The stellar nucleosynthesis.
Oh, yeah.
all that. Like some of those dating methods using decay rates and stuff.
Yeah.
Are they still margins of error of millions of years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It depends on what your target, you know, the older it is, the bigger the margin of error for whatever the dating method is. But what they will usually try to do is they combine it. They're like, okay, let's count the scars in the crystal. Let's also count this isotope, and let's also count this other one. And when we combine all of that, then you can lessen the margin of error, but they're still pretty big sometimes. And if, as seems increasingly likely, that catastrophic periods are frequent, and geologically speaking, every 10, 12, 20,000 years, you get a catastrophic event. Then if you have a margin of error of 400,000 years, that encompasses multiple catastrophic events.
Yeah.
And, if a whole mountain chain was erupted in one of those and then a separate mountain chain somewhere else erupted in another, they would look like the same age,
Right.
according to this dating technique.
Okay. Well, I think that's it.
Oh, yeah. That's it. You're right.
That was great, man.
That's a good stopping place. Yeah, the next chapter actually that we'll be getting into in the next episode probably is chapter 10, the one he's been talking about throughout the whole thing, where we're going to start talking about the mammoths and all this stuff trapped in the ice and everything. So yeah, we've gone through sea levels and mountain building and crust cracking and all this geophysical stuff and all this data, and now we're, according to Hapgood, ready to look at this data with these eyes, right? The data that we that more of us are familiar with from Velikovsky's Earth and Upheaval and Randall's stuff. So now we're going to look at these animals trapped in the ice and stuff through Hapgood's eyes after going through all this data.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Next month.
Right. Look for it in December.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break.
Okay.
Do the final segment.
All right, hangover's back. Book report over for today. Final segment here. Already did the rock and roll update.
Excellent!
Played a kick-ass show. But it was great. We didn't have the drummer, but
Yeah,
Russ killed it.
it was a great
on the
show.
djembe. It was a perfect vibe for that venue.
Kyle brought his djembe as well, and like on Deos, we jammed it together. And then for Sphinx, he played it, and I just
Played the horn and
sang and played the trumpet.
It was really fun. Dad jammed with us.
Yeah, Stash was
up
there.
rocking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was a great show. Yeah,
yeah.
it was a lot of fun.
It felt really good, man, to get back on stage, do some originals.
Yeah,
So yeah, what else? You already mentioned we're leaving for Egypt in a couple days. We'll already be on our way when this comes out.
yep.
So yeah, we just got to wrap up final few things with the wine right before we leave.
I did the full changeover of the beehives at the end of last week that I've been talking about. I put those new top feeders in, took the old feeders out, really pissed them off because I had to really crack the hives open.
The
to do all
horses
that
got
work.
stung.
Yeah, the horses. I took some video of doing the process. Maybe when I get back, I can put the video together as a little thing and maybe put it up on the Patreon or something. I don't know, but yeah, I got some video of, and the bees are just swarming me like crazy. But I got the top feeders in, and the great thing about those feeders is they hold a lot more food than the frame feeders I was using. So I should be able to provide them with enough food to carry them over for the entire time we're gone. I hope. I don't know, but I'm going to fill them up before we leave. So
Cool.
like fill them all the way up so they have plenty of food. And yeah, now the horses will leave the beehives alone. We have these.
They know now.
We have these miniature horses, 3 of them, and they They were coming up and actually pawing at the hives because I guess they can smell that honey in there.
They don't have paws.
You know,
They're hoofing at the hives.
They're hoofing it. But they're like scraping on the back of the hive, and they would piss the bees off. And they came up right when I was cracking them open, and I looked over there and I saw them, and I was like, "You want to leave?" And sure enough, one of them got stung, and they all started running. Hopefully they've learned their lesson, because I've been worried that maybe one of them would knock the hive over, and then it would be really bad. They'd get stung a lot if they did that. So you don't want that to happen. But yeah, I was reading about it, and people were like, yeah, generally you might want to keep your horses away from the hives because horses are curious and they can disturb the hives. So, and you don't want them to get stung.
We do want them to get stung.
Just once or twice so that they learn. Yeah, so that's the ag update, right?
Oh, we just released the... oh, no, we haven't released it yet. We're about to release the reserve blend. I guess we already mentioned that.
Yeah, you sent off for the labels.
That's right. I finished the label.
Yeah.
So
when we get back, we'll label them and
yeah,
then they'll
so
be
they
ready
should
to
be
go.
released in December too.
Yeah,
It's good.
it is good. It is good.
Sorry. Cat. Dang it.
God dang it. Okay, Space Weather News. From spaceweather.com. Solar flare and radio blackout. Sunspot AR3149 exploded on November 7th, producing an impulsive M5 class solar flare. Radiation ionized the top of Earth's atmosphere and caused a shortwave radio blackout over the South Pacific, including part of Australia and all of New Zealand. Stay tuned for updates. And 21 years ago, a severe geomagnetic storm, and it could happen again and soon. 21 years ago, a full halo CME struck Earth's magnetic field, sparking a severe G4 class geomagnetic storm. Skies over Central Europe glowed bright red and violet, recalls Heiko Ulbricht, who photographed the display from Germany on November 6th in 2001. The shock front hit the Earth's magnetic field around 2 a.m., good timing for skywatchers in Europe, he said. From there, aurora spread around the world, descending as far south as Florida, Texas, and California in the United States, and this storm persisted for more than 24 hours. The CME left the sun 2 days earlier, propelled by an X1 class solar flare from sunspot AR9684. Coronagraph images of the CME were quickly overwhelmed by a snowstorm of energetic particles, accelerated by shock waves in the approaching storm cloud. The kind of explosion that produced this storm is, interestingly, not rare. Young Solar Cycle 25 has already produced 8 similar X flares since 2021. None of the related CMEs delivered a direct hit, however. If you look at the sun today, it could definitely produce a spectacle of this kind again, says Ulbricht. Browse the Aurora Gallery from 21 years ago on spaceweathernews.com or spaceweather.com to see what might be coming.
Man, that's cool.
Yeah. Current conditions, solar wind speed 393.4 kilometers per second. The density is 5.64 protons per cubic centimeter. Sunspot number is 78. Neutron count is 4.7% above the space age average. KP index is 1, which is very quiet. 24-hour max is 2, which is also quiet. That is your Space Weather News for the month.
Yeah. Let's see what crypto's doing here.
Still floating around 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bitcoin, $20,880.20. Ethereum, $1,581.89. Not much going on there.
It has been amazingly stable.
Yeah.
After that, all those drastic rises and crashes and rises and crashes, it's like very stable now, which is interesting.
Sure is, yeah.
Yeah.
Does not look stable when you look at the all-time graph, though.
No. No, it doesn't.
All right. You want to do some emails?
Emails. We've got 4 very short email notes. This one's called Thanks, I Think, from Greg.
I understand.
Greetings. Love the show, mind expanding, and I am familiar with much of the content, yet some of the ideas I have not considered before. The Hermetica has stimulated my spirituality to change directions. However, the most important thing I have learned so far is that from henceforth, in order to leave any kind of legacy, I will be using granite in all of its forms to build or write. Any good recommendation on stone tools? Sincerely, Greg.
Arrowheads are good. Stone tools.
I hear copper chisels are undefeated in making enormous stone constructions.
Oh, stone carving tools.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's what I assumed you meant, but maybe you're right. Arrowheads are also undefeated in longevity in terms of stone tools.
Yeah. They're pretty good. By the way, the Watcher is back.
Oh, yes.
Forgot to mention that. Just forgetting to mention the Watcher.
All right. You doing Andrew?
Yeah. This is from Andrew. He says, "Hi, bros. Kyle, I was stoked to hear your rant about the observer effect. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that the Schrodinger's cat thing has the cat in a box. But for that to be really true would require that the box is fully isolated from the rest of the universe and therefore removed from any interactions with any particle." Huh. He says, so he's referring to the observer effect in the double slit
Yeah.
experiment. Quantum physics.
The Schrodinger's cat thing is a little different, but is based on the same principles, but it's not quite the same thing. But yeah.
Yeah, the cat's going to be killed by some mechanical device.
Yeah.
So it's not, it can be in contact with the world, but
Yeah.
I think I get what you're,
Yeah. Yeah, the Schrodinger's cat experiment was trying to show he was trying to illustrate the ridiculousness of the idea of superposition.
yeah, that until you observe it, it's in both states.
Right. And he's saying, well, what if you set up some system that would have to thus transfer the superposition onto a macro object?
Yeah.
Thus the cat in the box.
And so then you can say the cat is both alive and dead.
Right. Until you
observe.
open the box and find out which one it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But thanks, man. I appreciate that. I like to rant about that. He goes on to say, "I still think the observation that narrative is required, but it's only true for humans. We seem to be meaning-making machines, and the material works is inherently meaningless. So to interact with the world, we must impose meaning on it. This is not a statement about objective reality, but subjective. That's all I have for now. Keep up the good work. Snakes!" And then he signs as AJ.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a response to the narrative conversation we had.
Yeah, I mean, we're the ones that create narrative, for sure. So I'm not sure that, I mean, I guess if there were aliens, they could create narrative, but I was definitely referring to narrative, like creating cultures. So purely talking about humans.
Yeah. And then I think he's also just discussing the broader philosophical idea, like is there meaning inherent in the universe?
I tend to think there is.
Right. He's saying that the material works of the universe is meaningless. We're the ones that add meaning to it. That's what he's saying. I think we're meaning-making machines. But I think that a materialist reductionist would agree with you that the universe is meaningless. The meaning is added by us.
I don't know about that. I'm not sure I agree with that. That's what I'm saying. I think I lean towards that there actually is meaning to it.
Yeah.
It's not us. It's not imposed by us. We can impose meaning on things, but
Yeah. But if there's a deeper meaning than that, like one of the things, if you believe in a creator of some kind, so the universe was created for a reason, then it has inherent meaning before you ever impose any of your own on it. Or if consciousness is fundamental,
Is the idea
comes
that,
from some other realm, then that imposes meaning on the universe.
is the idea that a random occurrence has no meaning? I mean, why should that? Is that what the basic argument is?
That's a great
If it's
question.
random, it can't have meaning. I don't necessarily agree with that either. So if the universe spontaneously came
Yeah,
into
I think that would be
existence,
the argument. If it's
so there's no meaning to it. I don't
right, it's just an accident of mathematics. Any meaning is applied after the fact by people or by conscious beings.
Maybe I don't have a very good definition of meaning.
Just think about the double rainbow, bro. What does it mean?
Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that.
All right.
Next,
Roddy the Mammal.
hey,
Path of the Pole and Star Charts. Dearest Ophidian siblings, I love the book report on the Path of the Pole. I'm a large fan, humongous even, of Hapgood, and own both of his books. Upon my reading of the Path of the Pole, I re-axized my trusty globe so that Hudson Bay is now the North Pole. An odd but informative task done in preparation for a book series I'm planning, but I digress. Anyway, as I've been idly spinning my globe and pondering the greater and lesser mysteries of ancient civilizations, a thought strayed into the dusty corridors of my mammalian gray matter and left me with two questions. Currently, the varied ancient temples, stone circles, et al. Are aligned to current solstices, equinoxes, pole star, and constellations familiar to today's astronomers, astrologers, and amateur stargazers alike. If the poles had shifted, would not said temples, stone circles, et al. Be out of alignment with the current stars above and therefore disprove Hapgood's theorem? Well, wait a minute. I think that would prove it, right? Or is he
I
saying
think
that
he's saying that because they're all aligned, this disprove?
disproves it? Yeah. Well, we had Martin from Mario Build Reps on, and he says that according to his calculations, that a lot of them are aligned to cardinal directions that are not correct anymore.
Well, they're.
What? They have a
That's a weird
north-south
way of
alignment.
saying it. Yeah, they don't have a north-south alignment anymore.
Right. Further, has anyone recharted the stars based on Hapgood's varied wandering pole positions to see if said ancient temples, stone circles, et al. Lined up in a way significant with the differing solstices, equinoxes, pole stars, constellations, and alignments, which would support Hapgood's theorem? Apologies for the verbose, long-winded email, but as I am warm-blooded and blessed with a higher metabolism, such verbosity comes naturally among the furred brethren and truth seekers such as myself. Thank you in advance. Yours, Roddy the Mammal. Well, that wasn't so verbose.
Booky.
Yeah, it was very concise. I think those are great questions. And one thing you could say is that if Hapgood is correct and the poles have shifted and all of the ancient sites that we know of now point to current pole conditions or pole positions, then those must be younger than the last pole shift.
Right.
And thus any previous civilizations, their constructions either haven't been found yet or were completely destroyed.
So the problem with the statement, all of the stone circles and ancient constructions that are aligned to the poles are to the current poles. So what about the ones that are not aligned to? Because there are a lot of ancient structures that don't seem to have a north-south
Yes.
alignment.
Yeah.
So what about those? That's what Mario Build Reps is.
Yes, that's right.
His whole data set deals with. Pretty
And I
interesting.
think that with, what people usually do is if they're not cardinally aligned, then
They
they
just-
look for some other current astronomical alignment.
Yeah. And if they don't find one, then it's just assumed not to be aligned.
Right.
All right. Is that it?
There's a short Patreon message from Jordan.
Okay. Jordan, he says, my favorite species, whatever that means, of snake is definitely the Rusk-Halbrett snake of Texas.
Whatever that means. Hey. That's great. That's
yeah.
a reference
Species.
to the that's a reference to the hybridization series.
for sure.
Whatever that means.
He says, I love you guys. Whispers real loud. Snakes. Appreciate it, Jordan.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you for joining the Patreon. Really appreciate that.
All right, that's it, man. We're all caught up.
Caught up on the emails just before we take off for a month, and we're going to be way behind again.
Yep. Well, I could do this story real quick, or we could just call it. I don't know. Whatever you want to do. So, the hangover's back.
Oh, let's call it.
All right.
We can call it.
Okay.
It's 2 hours. We're good to go.
We'll give you guys plenty
gonna
of
be
material from Egypt.
There's going to be so much content
Oh,
coming
we
from
were going to
Egypt.
talk about the plans.
Yeah,
We'll
okay.
do that.
Yeah,
We'll do that.
So people have been asking, do you have goals for this Egypt trip? So we've gone once before, got our minds blown. Now we're going back. We kind of know what we're getting into. Obviously we're still looking forward to getting our minds blown by stuff and having our ideas changed on things. But second time around, what are our goals now that we've been there before and we have a better idea of what's happening? So I have multiple goals. One of them is because I've been giving this presentation, and if you can see it, we recorded it as a podcast called Unfinished. I don't remember what the episode number was. Maybe the watcher can find that. But that presentation, I've given it multiple times. I'm going to be giving it in the future. I think George Howard is setting up a conference that's going to be in Asheville, and I'm going to be giving it there. And Graham Hancock's going to be there and stuff. So I want to have it like really dialed in. And so one of my goals is to get much better photographs for that particular presentation.
Yeah, that presentation really focused, like, in my mind, the types of photographs
Yes.
that we need to get.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's like a general goal on the entire trip, is to look for more aspects that would add to that presentation,
exactly.
and then capture good photos of.
Yes. Like there's multiple areas where I know like I need better pictures of this, and other areas where I want to go around, and then there's some other things like I want to circumnavigate all 3 pyramids on Giza. I would love to be able to do that. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but I'm going to try at least to walk the entire perimeter of all 3 of the Giza pyramids. Okay. Watcher says it was episode 243. It was Unfinished. So that presentation, there's multiple things we're going to be looking at, or I'm going to be looking for to get better photographs to add to that presentation and make it better, higher quality. What else? What other goals we have? We're going to be, we want some extended time in the Serapeum. We're going to be trying to do that.
I wanted to get better information on each box.
Yeah.
And know which ones I'm like, I want to have basically a map of the site, and then be able to mark like these photos are from this box.
Yes.
These photos are from this, know which ones in which chamber, and go. I would like to be able to do every single one. If I can't get in, at least like have good photos from lit up photos of the interior.
Yep.
As well as good photos of the exterior.
We want to check the outside corner of that one where you found the.
Yeah.
Like we want to
There's
see
a
like
piece
is there
left on the inside.
We want to see is there a corresponding cut on the outside of the box. There's a bunch of little details like that we want to check.
The other thing about that site in particular is the really checking the level of the rims, like the top rim of
yeah,
the
so you have to
boxes
flat-
with the floor level.
Yeah.
And it's like pretty detailed, but it's like I guess might lend to ideas of what the function may have been, just like knowing where they sit in reference to the actual floor of the tunnel. So that's one small goal. Another goal is, should I talk about the other goal?
Not yet.
Okay. I have another goal.
We have other goals.
I have another goal that I've been preparing for, and I'm not sure, but it's basically, I just want to get better. I want to get good photos.
Yeah.
We can talk about it later.
Let's see what else. Yeah, and I was in bad shape when we were in the Serapeum part of the tour last time. So hopefully I'll be my back was really hurting me for a couple of days there. I could barely like walk around. So this time I'm hoping to be in better shape for that. So I'll also be able to be more active when we're in that complex. And Ben's also talking about hopefully at least him and Kyle and I can get around to the back parts that we weren't able to get to before.
Yeah.
And see some of the other boxes. And there's one enormous one that's been shoved into
It's like broken.
shoved into a corner tunnel back there somewhere, like it was just discarded down in there. We want to look at that one. But yeah, the other, we'll be generating content on YouTube. Hopefully we'll be able to do some live streams. They probably won't be super long, but we'll be live streaming from certain areas where we have good signal. And then also we'll be dumping tons of material, photos and videos into the Discord chat. So you can join the Discord if you want to see that. Every day we basically put material up into the Discord, into a specific channel in there called Straight to Pyramids. So you can check in that, and then there's going to be tons of discussion on that in the Discord by all the other people that are in there, all the other Snake Bros fans. And we'll be making some Patreon content as well, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then maybe do a roadsode, a short one.
I'm really looking forward to going back under the step pyramid.
Yeah.
As well. That's a big. There's so much. It's like when we left, I felt like I just missed out on a whole bunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't take good enough photo. I was doing a lot of like videos.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. I'm like, we don't do a lot of video editing around here.
Yeah. That's
As
that's
know.
Ben's thing.
Yeah. So I'm going to be doing more photography. I'm just going to focus a lot more on photography.
We got you
Yeah, I can scan.
Yeah, Kyle's
So,
got a phone that will scan, get a LiDAR. So
Yeah.
if we'll ever use any of that, we don't know.
But still, it's got an amazing camera.
Yeah.
So.
yeah.
Also in general, all of the sort of new revelations we came back with from the first trip is now we're going back with these eyes.
Yeah.
So from the beginning of the trip, we're starting with all of the things that we realized at the end
Of the last one. Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to like the same thing happening on the next level.
Yes.
Deeper.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know watchers saying take a tone generator. I know.
You just can't make a lot of noise.
It's
It's
that's not doable.
yeah.
I would love to do that, but
You definitely
my
get
tone
busted.
generator is right here.
Yeah. I told GMA, I was like, we need a tone generator that uses like ultrasound.
Yeah.
It can't be heard by people. That would be great. Okay.
Oh, do we have any producer? I haven't even looked, dude.
Oh, do we have producers? Probably.
Slacking on the job here.
Maybe not.
I don't know. We had a whole bunch roll in.
Thanks to all the people that have been donating through the PayPal and the Patreon. It really helps. Really appreciate it.
Did we do the Patreon people last time? Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're up to date on all the producers.
Up to date.
Thank you all so much.
Yes. So if you want to donate, you can do that on the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. There is a support section of the website where you can join our pyramid scheme. Send us straight to pyramids with donations through Patreon or PayPal. If you do donations through PayPal and it's 50, or if it's over 50, you become an associate executive producer. If it's over 100, you're an executive producer, and you'll get mentioned in the show notes. And lots of people have done that, and we really appreciate it. If you join the Patreon, you get Patreon content. We do make Patreon content on occasion, and of course, when we're on trips like this, we make more. So sign up to the Patreon if you want to do that. You can also find the link to join the Discord. Like I said, we'll be posting a lot of stuff in the Discord for the Egypt trip. So if you want to see all that stuff, be part of the discussion, join the Discord. You can find the link to it on the website. Discord chat, Snake Pit. Just give us an email, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. I do read all of the emails that come in. I can't read them all on the show, but I do read a lot of them on the show. So send us an email. Maybe it'll get read on the show. And if you don't want it to be read on the show, say that in the beginning of the email so I know not to read it.
Also, look for Randall and Graham on Joe Rogan on the 11th.
Oh, yeah.
As well as that same day, Graham Hancock's Netflix series drops.
That's right.
Called, what is it? Ancient Apocalypse?
Ancient Apocalypse.
Yes. I hope we can binge that while we're in Egypt.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah. Yep. End of podcast stretch.
Yep.
Thanks to Jeff for running the Discord and all the mods in there. And everybody who supports the show. We really appreciate you guys. We love you.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.
Good night, Watcher.